Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a special build for a customer. We're going to use a Boxy Pixel CNC billet aluminum shell and their LiPo kit with the USB-C charging adapter and audio amplifier. We're going to mix that also with a IPS screen from our buddies at Handheld Legend, and if you stick around, we'll show you how to get that all done. All right, on the bench today, we have a Gameboy Advance custom build. This one's going to cover quite a few things, and this is a really sexy build. We have a bunch of parts, a billet aluminum shell and brass buttons, and this all came from Boxy Pixel, as I recall. I'll double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's who it was. The customer came to us and said, hey, is this something we can tackle? And I said, absolutely. I would love to be able to do this for them. And as you can see, we have the aluminum shell, very nicely machined and black anodized. We have brass buttons, so it's obviously going to be black and gold, Pittsburgh Steelers. And we have a glass lens, and it's looking like the IPS cutout is appropriate. We have hardware, and we have some plastic buttons, I'm assuming just so we have the sides. So, oh, and also some nice 3D printed parts. I took a close look at them. There's no real layer lines in them, and they feel textured. So I'm assuming these are resin printed, but they're very nice. And while looking over the kit and the install instructions from the company, there were a few things that caught my attention. A few things that I'll go over in a little more detail later. But while this is an absolutely sexy machine, they kill the opportunity for AA batteries. As you can see, there's no battery hatch. So because of that, we have to install a LiPo. Now, if you take on a project like this and you're trying to source your parts, or you're the creative type that wants to do their own thing, if you use a lithium battery, make sure it's one with built-in overvoltage and undervoltage protection. This one has a small circuit board right up in here, which keeps any kind of badness from happening. Also, the board that was ordered from Boxy Pixel should be a standard battery charge board for, in this case, USB-C, which will output 5 volts, like to a standard USB port, and then our 4 volts into our battery, or give or take. Now, like I said, it outputs 5 volts. Our standard Gameboy Advance, and this is our donor board, runs off 2 AA cells, 1.5 volts apiece. That's only 3 volts. One of the things I mentioned to the owner of this is I was not a fan of the way Boxy Pixel decided to do their power management. It's one of those cases where, yes, it works, but it's not the best method. So what they wind up having us do is putting a diode on the output of our 5-volt board. I haven't looked up the exact specs of this diode, but most diodes will have approximately a 1.2 to a 1.5 volt drop across its junction. It's just nature of the beast. Some can be a little lighter, some can be heavier, but that's kind of a standard diode. So ultimately, we're going to get about 3.5 to 4 volts, which puts us in the range of a pair of AA batteries. The downside is this really wasn't designed to be a voltage regulator. So depending how much current you try to pull across it, this little guy can get hot. Personally, with the time and the effort they put into designing some of this stuff, I'm not sure why they didn't just build a board that had a small regulator built into it to output the correct voltage. But that's neither here nor there, and this is what we have for now. So, along with this project, just like any of our other projects, you need a donor board out of a standard Gameboy Advance. This one came out of a pretty beat up clear purple, but was in perfectly good working condition. The other thing is this shell's already set up for IPS, but since it's aluminum, it's kind of limiting what screens can be used. A lot of the newer screens, the versions 3s, 4s, 5s that are out there, they have touch sensors. Obviously, touch sensors aren't going to work through the metal. So you have to use the version 2 type screens that come from Handheld Legend. You can order this through Boxy Pixel, but some of the pricing can be better at Handheld Legend. That's where I get most of my parts like this from. And as always, check the links below. There's some discount coupons if you've never ordered from Handheld Legends in the past. So, where does that bring us? Okay, so we're going to do this build, but it's going to be a little bit more cut up than some of our other videos, just because we've done V2 screen installs in the past, probably at this point almost a year ago, and I'll link that above. And, you don't need to see me disassemble a Gameboy Advance to get the board out, because in that video, it'll show the disassembly process and the cleaning process and how to put this on this board and where to solder all of our wires. This one doesn't use touches, or the touch panels. This one uses the combinations of the select and the left and right button to adjust brightness and whatnot. So, I guess what we need to do, since we already have our board out and we have a screen ready, just start going through the steps on what it takes to build this guy. So I'm going to set some of this aside. And it would help to turn on some of our equipment. So one of the first things we need to do, since we're not using the batteries, is we need to remove these battery contacts, which is not a hard thing to do. Make sure we have a heavy enough tip. Honestly, all you need to do is heat it up and pull them off. These will probably get hot while I'm doing it, so I'm not going to use my bare fingers. Let's just see what this looks like. We may have to use a bit of debraid. Oh, maybe not. Okay, I was afraid that the tabs that come up through the board would be flared out, so we'd have to clean the solder off, but obviously not. So that comes out pretty easy, and our second one should come out just the same. There we go. Needed to use a little something to get up underneath the edge. Yeah, don't try to grab these. They're going to get hot pretty quick. And, we can clean this up with a little bit of braid. Get some of the excess solder off of it. There we go. And of course, we want to clean up any burnt flux. Also, now's a good time, in prepping our board, just clean up the all of our button areas. Just make sure they're not bad. And this one's pretty clean. And also, there was another board here, wherever it got off to. I believe, yeah, there's an audio amplifier board, and we'll have to address that. So we might as well disconnect our speaker, since this is obviously something that's going to be installed. Now, this audio amplifier is not a necessity. Obviously, this is just something that the customer wanted. but we want those holes open. Oops. Oh, where'd we go? Here we are. As you can see, the braid on leaded solder will pull those holes wide open. All right, and that's pretty much all we need to do on this board. If your donor board was kind of old and nasty, a little bit of alcohol down into the switch and run it back and forth a few times will definitely help keep it in better working order. All right, so we'll set the board out of the way. And we will actually save those. Never know when you find a Game Boy that has some crusty connectors from some dead batteries. All right, so one of the things that I noticed while just kind of looking over the instructions was that if we're using the metal buttons, which obviously we are, to check for burrs. And there are a few rough spots. You can just kind of go over the tops of these guides. While the machine work is absolutely beautiful, the you know, you don't want stuff to hang up whenever you're first starting to play. Okay, I'm going to get a clean paper towel so we're not just setting this down on my dirty old mat. There we go. These are not marked A and B, so, but they are position sensitive. Okay, one of the other things you got to make sure, if you don't order a new diffuser, make sure you steal it out of your old shell. And that's for our power indicator. And we have some new membranes, but this isn't necessary. If your membranes were in good shape, you can definitely reuse them. Okay. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to find a small piece of foam so these buttons aren't being pushed up, and I'll be right back. All right. I grabbed the chunk of foam that I normally use for working on switch lights. You can see it's cut out for the two joysticks, and it gives me a place to be able to push on it. Switch lights are a bit flimsy. I don't want to just work on them and have them twist and wind up cracking the screen. So I just added a couple more notches so we can you know, set it in so the buttons aren't pushing out as far. Now, the next bit we want to tackle is our screen. So here again, the full details of this is going to be up in the video I posted already about installing a V2 screen. So the big thing is from Handheld Legend, they always want you to test before you do a full assembly, because you don't want to find out at the very end you've got a busted screen. So I put the controller board on the back. You can see our film is still on it. Snapped it into our board, and since I removed the you know, our spring clips already, I just soldered a couple quick wires on there, and we can take our power supply and hook it up. Like I said, This is originally running on 3 volts. And yes, this is an extremely thin wire. Matter of fact, it's one of the wires that came in the kit. Turn on our output, and all you have to do is loosely slide it in. You can see it's not even clipped the whole way. Slide in the ribbon and turn it on, and we should... Okay, we get a screen, no cracks. Those red lines are marks on the film. So our screen's good. All right, so we can turn that back off and set all our stuff aside. And we can move our board aside for now too. Now, in prepping the screen, just a quick overview. There's an FPC connector that needs snapped, real gentle, the protective film on the back, and then just fold it over. And of course, the V2 screens had, you know, both the, whatever it was, the 40, what are they? 40 pins, yeah. The 40 pin and I believe this is a 32 pin. So this one's ready to go. And let's set that aside. And just like with a standard IPS install, this is going to go in this direction the whole way up into this top. And I believe this is what these guides are for. And this is going to kind of hold us in place. Now, I'm not sure if they want us to use the foam, and I don't think they do. I think this screen just goes right in against the metal body, yes. But it does have a small piece of foam they want us to put on the back, and you know, we could just use some of this and some double-sided tape that comes with a lot of these IPS screens, and I always keep some around. Like that. All right. So at this point, I'm going to peel our film, and you can see those 2 lines right there. And carefully set it down in. And the spacer should fit. Just like that. Well, I will say this. These resin printed parts, and I guess that's a spare. These resin printed parts in the machine case, there's a lot of precision to it compared to plastic. Now, the Prestige shells that I've used in builds in the past, they're absolutely great. I love the feel of them, and they're great. But, you know, plastic gets pulled out of a mold and it cools. There's some shrinkage, there's some moving. So, enough of that. Like I said, I absolutely love the Prestige shells, which can also be bought at Handheld Legend. And we're going to do what they asked. Stickies on that. Put it there. And unfortunately on their instructions, it doesn't show a whole lot other than it just being a patch of foam. So we'll just cut a patch of foam and stick it on. About like that. All right, so this is going to be our cable that's going to get flipped over, and our circuit board is here. We can take these wires back off for now. And of course I used the thickest black wire I could find, but it's just what was laying here. And when installed, it's going to basically be sitting like this. Sorry if I'm putting my head in the shot. Cable in. Push the bail closed. All right. You can carefully lay this out. Well, can't lay it out the whole way because that screen's down inside now. But from here, we can get something to prop us up. I'm on my cartridge burner. About like that. We're going to have to make a few connections here on the board for our touch buttons. And honestly, those are all outlined in the video above. So I'm going to go ahead and do those, and I'll be right back. All right. So we got the screen put in place, pushed it down, add a little foam. And what I wound up doing, the instructions from the company just said add a piece of foam, and it didn't come with anything. So I just used the backing foam from the screen, but what I wound up having to do is kind of a double up on it to get a little bit more pressure, just so the screen wouldn't rattle around. And this foam is extremely soft, so even doubling it or tripling it up wouldn't add any real pressure. The other thing I went ahead and did off camera was to take this factory little short wires off, because I had to look into the audio amplifier, because it's not part of the standard build instructions from Boxy Pixel. So I added a couple longer wires to the speaker. So that brings us to our power and our audio board. This is the 3D printed piece, and it fits right down in here where the original battery would have been. And it is set up for both, but it is better set up for the power. As you can see, that slides right into place. Absolutely perfect. These are phenomenal as far as quality on these 3D prints. And like I said, I believe these are resin prints. And then for the most part, what I can tell from some of the other instructions is this is just going to wind up sitting right about there. So I guess we're going to attach that with some double-side tape, and we'll solder up to the top. But let's look at our power first, just so we know where we're at. Also, whenever I put this board in, I went ahead to solder on the left and the right button wires, and you put 2 screws in, and needless to say, do not use any of the hardware that came from your original Game Boy. Use theirs. These are machine cases with machine threads, and it's very nice hardware. So the little pan heads will go here, and I believe the pan heads are also going to hold this board in place. Okay, so for the most part, I think we can screw this guy down, and I'm going to go ahead and do that, or at least, see how everything's fitting. And of course, everything has lined up absolutely perfect. Like I said, plastic shells, there's a little bit of fiddling, a little bit of trimming and whatnot, but this has been just a pleasure to work with. And of course, our USB-C port lines up with the shell. So we have a few points here marked. M, B positive, B negative, and negative out, or I guess this M's on the board, out positive. So these are obviously our battery plus and minus, and this is our out plus and minus. And we have, you can see it right here, this one's marked battery positive, this one's marked battery negative. And this is where we pulled our contacts from. So this is the point where I said I didn't really care for it. Where'd that diode get off to? There it is. It's sitting up in the shell. So our diode is going to solder into the board on the out. And of course, the line marks our anode and our cathode. And since we're going to flow through, this is going to be the side without the line going down to our board. And for the most part, it wants us to have it sitting, right in that little tray right about there. So we can trim this diode down pretty far. Give that a little bend. Well, of course I bent it the wrong way, but that's okay. We can bend it back. Our diode's going to sit right there. So let's go ahead and solder that into position. About like that. And the other thing we can look at is our battery. We can pull the plug. I don't believe they want us to not use the plug, so we'll pull the plug. Take the tape off that side. And, well, we're going to hold off on that to see exactly where that needs to sit. See how much slack we're going to need. And since this is all screwed down, let's see, our audio board's going to sit right about there. Push that up a little farther so it doesn't interfere. Now, since this is all soldered in place, we don't really have to worry too much about, oops, throwing things on the floor. We don't have to worry too much about things shorting out. Otherwise, we'd, have some double-sided tape. I'm just putting a little extra solder on this side of the board so we can there's our positive connection. And let me find a little nicer wire for our negative. I'll be right back. All right, so we got some better wire for our negative. We're just going to solder this to the output of this board. Like that. Kind of giving some room for the audio mod. It's going to fit in there. About like that. So let's get some double side on that. All right, there's our audio board. Now, I'd already pulled some thin wires because this is not a whole lot of power. So I got some red and the black, and of course yellow and purple here, and orange and green. This is just thin 30 gauge hookup wire. So it's real easy to strip with your fingernails. And I'm going to go ahead and tin up our points. They've already got a little solder on them. So let's see, we have ground, voltage in, SD, we're probably not going to use that one. A amplifier minus, amplifier positive. So let's go ahead and solder here. Of course, all the solder went right down the hole. Hold on. Okay. This side with the larger lugs is going to be our output, and we need ground and power. There we go. All right. Getting pretty close to the end of this one, except my soldering iron wire is all twisted. Well, let's get that untwisted. So, push these out of the way for a moment. And where we're going to hook up power, I'll actually change the tip. Get something a little finer on here. Let that come up. The places we're going to pull power from, we're going to get our positive power from the top of these two caps. Both of them are together. And our negative is on the negative side of this electrolytic cap. So, since that's the shorter of the wires, we'll start with our ground. We'll trim it off. Let's go ahead and get a little bit more solder on that. And I'm going to add a little flux to these tiny little caps. And while we're at it, we're just going to add some flux to everything else we're working on. Because, you know, flux is our friend, as I've always said. Add some solder to the caps. I can actually make that a little longer because we're going to come across both of them. This one's going to be a little difficult to get to. There we go. That should still be out of the way, depending what the top of the shell looks like. And it's wide open, so nothing's going to interfere down in here. All right, so the next thing we want to do is trim these off for our audio input. some solder in on our board. Out like that. And one thing to be careful of are like points like this. That's going to probably be a screw coming in from the top shell. So you got to make sure you have clearance around it. You don't get wires pinched underneath. Even though this is an amplifier, there's still voltages running through it. All right, so get some of this out of our way. And then our final bit is to bring our speaker over. And here again, we'll put a little bit of flux on top since these wires will flow better with it. All right, all our connections are made, and I can use a little alcohol to clean up any leftover flux. And as far as I know, this one marked SD that we tinned just a second ago is not going to anything. So, but I'll verify and see where we're at. Okay, we still recording? Yeah, we are. Okay, they didn't say, I was just looking over the instructions real quick. You know, this is the first time I've built one of these aluminum shells, and they really didn't say what to do with the battery or the wires or anything. There's a little bit of room here, but you know, a lot of it's being gobbled up from the audio amp. So honestly, the only thing it looks like we can do is make sure the wires are flat, and you know, maybe we're going to storm over here, but let's see. It's all open. And there's definitely an opening here for the battery. And maybe, yeah, we can set the battery right into this area. There's a lot of line left, but you know, is what it is. But I think we'll be okay on that. So, where does that leave us? I guess that leaves us with putting some triggers in. And I guess we should try plugging this in and see if it lets all the smoke out. But as long as we're all soldered up right, negative, positive, this audio board's not touching anything. I'm not a real fan of the way this is all set up and laid out, but I'm just following their instructions. So I'm going to put a piece of Kapton tape over some of this, just so things don't shift. That'll help hold things in place. And I guess we should set the volume in the middle since we now have a power amp. to make sure this connector is flat, so we have a spot for the battery to sit. About like that. All right, so I guess the one bit of plastic we're going to need is a switch. And we do have that. Okay, there we go. Everything should be clear of anything that would pinch it. That's a screw, that's a screw. All right, so let's give this a test fit. Really want this to stay on this side of the inductor. We may put a piece of Kapton tape on that too, just to hold it in place. Now I checked the battery before I put this all together, and it wasn't fully charged, but there was a charge in it. So we should be good for the initial test. There we go. That should keep us in place now. So, as you can see, Kapton tape is just something good to keep around. We have our shoulder triggers. Everything's wired. Let's see how she fits. All right, it's pushing down on that side, but we are binding on this side. So here again, don't force it. All right, sorry about that interruption. The two shells weren't dropping down, and you never want to force these things. So I sat and played with it for a little bit. I thought that these wires were, you know, hanging up under these edges, or these supports were pinching something. So I wound up just taking this trigger out and looking inside, and what I found is the plastic right here on the cartridge slot, just this top lip, was grabbing this aluminum from the shield. Obviously just a slight imperfection in the positioning, but it's okay. This shield doesn't go the whole way down, and we just had to nip the top. Just be careful not to hit the board whenever you're, you know, trimming it. So now I think this is all going to line up. Which it does. All right, so now we finally got it in. And we have a whole bunch more screws here. I don't think we need all of these, but they look all the same size. Let's go ahead and put them in our shell. We flip it around and put our screen on. And just like any other build, if things aren't fitting, don't force them. You're going to wind up either pinching a wire and shorting something out, or cracking your screen or causing some other damage. So always take that step back and oh, look at that. That's pretty. All right. Make sure there's no dust or fingerprints on that screen. We're looking pretty clean there. And we'll get our new screen. Of course, I got this thing packaged up so you can't even open it. All right, hold on. And as I've said on every other video that I'm doing a screen, don't poke your eye out with your glasses. No. When you expose the film, don't just grab this and expect it to be ready, because obviously you still can't see through it. Now this one's got this holographic tape on the back. It's a little easier to tell, but when it's just the white, it's been known to cause some problems and have two. I see a small fingerprint. Hold on. All right. It's one of the benefits of using these glasses. Like I've said, I don't generally use them for reading, but it makes the close-up work a lot easier. There we go. Grab a cartridge, put it in, and cross our fingers. This thing looks absolutely great. Of course, this isn't the best test cartridge in the world to use, but it happens to be the one laying on our bench. But there you have it. That's the Boxy Pixel shell. Oh my God, this thing's got a ton of weight. And that little amplifier puts out quite a bit of volume. So, the Boxy Pixel shell, Boxy Pixel brass buttons that just look phenomenal. The Handheld Legends V2 IPS screen, the USB-C power mod, and an audio amplifier mod. Hopefully this doesn't get too cut up because there was some fiddly bits in the middle. But if you enjoyed the video, give us that thumbs up. If something seemed too cut up or too confusing and you have to give us that thumbs down, make a comment below. Tell me what you would like to see better. On that point, any comments below, I respond to all real questions and comments. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you on that next video. Thanks for joining.